No, no, please sit down. I think there is a lot in the literature on how the exchange rate is determined. Well, in the days when the entire exchange rate is determined purely by the current account transactions, the purchasing power parity theory held good. The purchasing power parity theory is what you are talking about. But in a world in which the balance of payments has a large capital account, the capital flows also have a bearing upon the exchange rate. But we will have a separate session on what you want to talk about.
We thank Dr. Rangarajan for chairing and moderating the session. We place on record our sincere gratitude to our esteemed panelists for sparing their valuable time and being with us here today. Before we proceed for lunch, we would like to quickly run you through the post-lunch session, as there has been a slight change in the program. From 2:15 to 2:45, there would be plenary lecture 2, which would be chaired by Dr. Vijay Kelkar, and the panelist would be Professor Maurice Obstfeld. From 2:45 to 4:15, plenary panel 2 would be chaired by Mr. Nandan Nilinkani, and the panelist would be Professor Pranab, Professor Rehman Sobhan, Ms. Aruna Roy, Ms. Shikha Sharma, Professor Partha Sarthi Shom. From 4:15 to 4:45, the session would be chaired by Mr. N.K. Singh, and the speaker would be Professor Abhijit Banerjee. The last session for today, from 4:45 to 5:15, would be chaired by Mr. Pradeep Chaudhary, Chairman SBI, and the speaker would be Mr. Swaminathan S. Ankleswar Iyer and Mr. T.N. Nainan. The closing remarks would be given by Dr. Kaushik Basu, Chief Economic Advisor, and the Foreign Secretary to the Government of India, Sri Ranjan Mathai. And after this session finishes off at 5:30 today, Malika Sarabhai and her troupe would be performing today at 7:15 p.m. Ladies and gentlemen, this session would not be complete if we would not thank each one of you for being present here today and being with us and make this conference a success. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Okay.
Kelkar, Chairman, National Stock Exchange of India. Dr. Kelkar is well known for his contributions to economic reforms in India. He has served at various positions in the government, ranging from the Planning Commission to Commerce Ministry and of course the Finance Ministry. Prior to his appointment by the NSE, Dr. Kelkar headed the 13th Finance Commission. May I please request Ms. Pallavi Pal to come up on the stage and present the life plant and memento to Dr. Vijay Kelkar.
To present the lecture, we have with us Professor Maurice Obstfeld from the University of California, Berkeley. Professor is well known for his work in international economics. He is the director of the Center for International and Development Economics Research. He also serves as honorary advisor to the Bank of Japan's Institute of Monetary and Economic Studies. Now, I may please request Ms. Megha Yadav to present the life plant and memento to Professor. I now invite Professor Obstfeld to present his lecture on the topic Financial Flows, Financial Crisis and Global Imbalances.
Friends, I want to thank first Professor Kaushik Basu for two things. One, for organizing this really outstanding conclave and of course inviting me. And he was particularly kind to me, asked me to chair this session, perhaps knowing that Professor Obstfeld is teaching in my alma mater, which is at Berkeley. So it was given me an added pleasure to be here. So Professor Obstfeld has agreed that he will make a presentation for 20 minutes. Then we'll have discussion from the floor. You have the floor, sir.
I was in chatting, we discovered that we both had studied under Professor Avinash Dixit, who's one of the great teachers of the subject. So we have more in common than we thought. It's a great pleasure to be here at the Delhi Conclave. I probably have a slideshow which is too long for the amount of time I have, so forgive me for rapidly going through some of the slides. But the basic theme of my lecture today is the impact of financial globalization, clearly very intimately related to the great crisis of 2007-09, the Eurozone crisis, and possibly future crises, including crises in emerging markets, of which I'm certain we'll see some in the coming years. The challenge that I want to raise today is how do we want to think about international financial vulnerability, the risk of financial crises, and what is the relation to global imbalances? Financial globalization allowed the emergence of very big global imbalances prior to 2007, imbalances which many have viewed as closely related to the financial crisis. What I want to emphasize today is that these imbalances are current account surpluses and deficits, and these are net flows of lending between countries. I will argue today that these are indeed a cause for concern. Generally speaking, current account imbalances, especially deficits, create vulnerability, and I think India today is no exception to this rule. But even greater vulnerability, and even more important for many countries, is the behavior of gross asset flows. The net current account can be viewed as exports minus imports. It has to be financed, however, and a deficit will be financed by some gross inflows of capital, which are net of the country's gross outflows of capital. And one of the things we learned quite painfully in the financial crisis and continue to learn in the Euro crisis is that the gross asset positions matter, because in a world with incomplete markets, I can't use my countrymen's assets to pay off my own liabilities. If I get into trouble, I may default. If I've been lent to by a leveraged institution, they may default. And all of this depends on the gross exposures, primarily, not the net exposures. To give you an idea of where we are and where we've come from in terms of gross exposures, I want to show you the data on gross asset positions held externally and gross external liabilities for a selection of countries from the Lane and Milesi-Ferretti data set. As you can see in this chart, these numbers have grown quite a bit since the early to mid-1990s. And for countries that are financial centers, here I show the UK and Switzerland, but one could add the Netherlands and the very prominent cases of Ireland and Iceland. The numbers are quite astronomical. These gross figures, which are a symptom of financial globalization, in my view, actually create vulnerabilities to financial crisis, which we do need to worry about quite a bit. The difference between a country's gross assets and its gross liabilities is what we call the NIIP, or the Net International Investment Position. The current account balance, or alternatively the balance of financial flows, doesn't actually measure the change in this net international position, because there are also capital gains and losses on the assets and liabilities due to things like exchange rate movements and equity price movements, which do not enter the balance of payments numbers, therefore do not enter the current account numbers, do not enter the national income and product accounts. But these are very real changes in the level of assets and liabilities of the countries which experience them. Even for a country like India, an emerging market, these are very significant, as I'll show you in a little bit. So we have the current account. It's clearly measuring changes in the external position. It's not a comprehensive measure. The comprehensive measure is the net international investment position. And even this is the difference between gross assets and gross liabilities. I want to argue that those are key for assessing financial stability, but still the NIIP itself is quite important for two basic reasons. Number one, it constrains the present value of a country's net export deficits. If I hold net external assets, I can run trade deficits over time. Conversely, if I have a net external liability, which is the position of India, the position of the United States, I have to run trade surpluses over time, equal in present value to my net external liabilities. This is one reason why the NIIP is important, and the other is that it determines, at least in the aggregate, the welfare effect of changes in world rates of return. If world rates of return rise, debtor countries in the aggregate are hurt. If they fall, debtor countries in the aggregate benefit. But again, by talking about the aggregate, I leave aside these issues of gross asset positions, gross liability positions, and their distribution in the population. For the United States, whose gross assets and liabilities now are both well above its GDP, changes in the net international investment position due to valuation effects are very large. I show those here in red. I also show the change in the current account, the change in wealth, external wealth due to the current account in blue. And you can see that these valuation changes have been huge. They increase in variability over time, and they can did amount in the crisis to well over $1 trillion in a single year. One interesting aspect of these valuation changes, by the way, is that the US has appeared since the early 2000s to be running current account deficits without incurring any net external debt, because a sequence of other changes has kept the net international investment position hovering at around 20% of US GDP. In fact, part of this is a data mistake. There is an inconsistency between the way flow statistics are collected and position data are collected. And then there are also valuation effects. And if you want to really assess what has been happening with the US, you should take the gap between these two lines and ascribe about half of it to problems in data, about half of it to valuation effects. And the information that we have, I think the best guesses we have, are in fact that these valuation effects are not systematic. At some level, the US has been lucky, and I'll show you a picture of the UK later, a country with much vaster gross external assets and liabilities, and assess what its situation is. Now, let me talk again about gross asset positions. I showed you some very large numbers, especially for countries like the UK. In theory, some swapping of assets, some generation of gross positions is beneficial. For example, when we have diversification in equity holdings across countries. But what has happened for many richer countries is that this process has gone much further than can be explained by trade in equity. In fact, much of these gross positions are debt positions. And this raises problems of potential counterparty failure, rollover risk, default risk, and the like. This has been much less so for the emerging markets. And in an interesting recent paper, Eswar Prasad at Cornell has shown that actually emerging markets have increased the fraction of their liabilities to foreigners that are equity liabilities. This is a stabilizing development for them because if you owe equity to foreigners, if you've basically issued stocks, if your companies do badly, you pay out fewer dividends, but you don't have default, you don't have a crisis. Moreover, emerging markets on the whole show less financial integration in terms of gross external assets and liabilities than do advanced economies, and this chart shows the comparison. I think India is a wonderful case in point, and so I want to spend a few minutes on its situation. Since 1991, policy in India has favored equity inflows in the form of FDI or portfolio equity and discouraged debt inflows, which still occur and are still problematic. In the crisis, these equities fell in value. They boomed in the recovery. Now they're falling again. But this in itself has not been a cause of crisis. This chart shows India's foreign assets and liabilities, and you can see the big